our mission today is to uncover exactly why ancient cultures worshipped sacred trees and how women transitioned from being these highly respected, practical forest herbalists into, well, basically marginalized historical figures. If you had a fever that was threatening to kill your child, you didn't just pray first. You went into the forest and you used olive leaves.
Yeah, you went straight to the source.
Or if you were in agonizing pain from an injury, you'd chew on willow bark.
Oh,
Which, we now know contains salicin, right? The active ingredient in aspirin.
exactly. And they used cedar oil to actively treat bacterial infections. They used fig sap for severe skin ailments. And they even used sticky pine resin to literally seal up open, bleeding wounds to prevent sepsis.
Wow.
I know, right? This wasn't mystical chanting or magic.
Yeah.
It was hard science just applied through nature.
It was incredibly rigorous empirical science, built on this hard-won expertise that had been accumulated and tested and refined over millennia.
And we have to remember who's doing this. In these early hunter-gatherer and agricultural communities, the people holding and applying this vast encyclopedic knowledge were overwhelmingly women.
Right.
Women served as the primary herbalists, the midwives, the frontline trauma medics, and the healers. They had to know exactly which root could calm a fatal fever or which bark could stop a postpartum infection.
And what time of year to harvest them, too.
Exactly. They gathered these remedies, prepared the tinctures, and passed this highly specialized, highly guarded knowledge down through unbroken chains of daughters and granddaughters.
But then human civilization does what human civilization always seems to do, which is, well, it expanded rapidly.
Yeah, exponentially.
And as these early cities grew into these sprawling city-states and kingdoms, the hunger for wood became absolutely insatiable. I mean, you needed massive timber for naval fleets and merchant ships.
And you needed endless building materials for growing city centers.
Right, plus fuel for the massive metallurgical forges to make bronze, weapons, and tools. And on top of all that, you had to clear thousands of acres of land for agriculture just to feed these booming populations.
So these incredibly rich ancient forests began to fall. The text points out that Lebanon's legendary cedar forests, which were supposedly inexhaustible, shrank to just a few scattered, protected groves.
And the lush, olive-covered hills of Attica were just stripped entirely bare.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is how this rapid environmental depletion completely transformed human spirituality. We often treat environmental history and religious history as, like, two totally separate subjects.
Right, like they don't talk to each other.
Exactly. But they are deeply intertwined. As these healing medicinal trees became increasingly rare due to deforestation, they took on a deeper, much more abstract symbolic meaning.
Because of scarcity.
Right. Think about human psychology. When something abundant becomes scarce, it becomes valuable. But when something that literally keeps your children alive becomes incredibly rare, people elevate it. They make it sacred.
So the practical daily knowledge of medicinal properties didn't just vanish overnight. It shifted.
Yes. The physical branch of a willow or a pine that used to be a literal physical remedy slowly became a symbolic emblem of divine care and protection.
Okay, let's unpack this. Wait, I need to stop you there because I want to make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. Are you saying that the classic imposing wooden staff, the ultimate symbol of a male wizard or a biblical patriarch or a royal king that we see in all ancient art?
Yeah.
Are you saying that actually started off as a woman's practical medical toolkit? Because that feels like a massive leap.
It is a big leap, but yes.
It's like taking a modern surgeon's scalpel, and then centuries later, a king is waving it around on a throne as a magic wand of authority.
Okay.
How do we get from a midwife's olive branch to a king's royal scepter?
Well, it wasn't an instant overnight theft of a symbol. It was a slow, agonizing process of institutionalization. You see, a wooden staff or a cut pole, which was once an ordinary tool taken from a healing tree by a woman who knew its exact biochemical use, that slowly morphed into a sacred object of reverence. Because the trees were vanishing, holding a piece of that wood became a symbol of wisdom, of ancestral knowledge, and of a connection to the divine forces that govern life and death.
But as this meaning expanded beyond the practical realm of the local forest, the social power dynamics began to shift.
Precisely.
Because once something becomes a symbol of ultimate power, institutions want to control it.
Exactly. These ritual objects, these staffs and sacred branches, were moved out of the local villages and into centralized temples and royal shrines. And those newly built institutions were increasingly controlled by rigid, male-dominated hierarchies.
So the healing power of the tree, which had historically been deeply rooted in feminine symbols of care, remedy, and maternal nursing instincts.
It was gradually absorbed into patriarchal political power. Masculine symbols replaced feminine imagery in the official state religions.
Wow.
Yeah, the practical knowledge rooted in a woman's daily survival toolkit was essentially confiscated and then transformed into the sacred abstract identity of institutional male authority.
If you're listening to this right now, you're probably picturing that classic image of a king holding a scepter and realizing it's an echo of a lost forest, which is wild.
It really is.
And I think that brings us to the emergence of perhaps the most universal symbol in all of human history, right? The tree of life. If wood was becoming the ultimate sacred material and the actual forests were disappearing, it makes total sense that the concept of the tree itself became the map of the entire cosmos.
It really is one of the most striking, undeniable patterns in human anthropology. I mean, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from Canaan to Scandinavia, you have cultures that never met, never traded, and never shared a language.
And yet they all independently chose the tree as their central blueprint for existence itself.
Yes. And the anatomical understanding of the sacred tree was universally shared too. Think about the roots. The roots dive deep down into the earth, into the darkness. They anchor you to the past, to the underworld, to your ancestors, and to your inherited wisdom.
Right. The roots do the invisible work. You cannot exist without them. And then the trunk is the present. It's you. It's the living, breathing wood standing in one specific, fleeting moment in time, entirely dependent on what the roots are pulling up from below.
And what the branches are catching from above.
Spot on. And those branches reach upward into the sky, into the heavens, representing the future, your descendants, and the realm of the divine.
We see this exact blueprint in the Norse Yggdrasil, the massive ash tree that literally held all the different realms of the cosmos together in its branches and roots.
Oh, yeah.
And we see it in the Egyptian Djed pillar, which was stylized like a tree trunk and symbolized the eternal connection between the living pharaoh and his divine ancestors in the afterlife.
And we see it in the highly stylized Mesopotamian cosmotrees carved into palace walls, too.
Right. But what the source text highlights is that in the Canaanite and early Hebrew traditions of the ancient Near East, this concept found a very specific, deeply powerful physical manifestation, which is the Asherah pole.
Right, the Asherah pole. We've got to dive into this. The text describes these as sacred wooden poles, or sometimes stylized, carved living trees that were intentionally planted and placed near altars.
Yeah.
But they weren't just decorative wood. They represented a maternal lineage, ancestral protection, and the direct, nurturing presence of the great mother goddess, Asherah. They were the physical anchor for the community.
They were. To the people who planted them in the earth, these poles were not mere metaphors. They were the physical, localized manifestations of divine presence.
And we actually have incredible, tangible archaeological evidence of just how ancient and deeply rooted this practice was, don't we?
We do. Near the modern city of Eilat, archaeologists unearthed a perfectly preserved juniper tree trunk that had been deliberately placed alongside a carved female figure.
And how old was it?
Carbon dating places this wooden trunk at roughly 4540 BCE.
Wait, wow, so over 6,000 years ago.
Yes. That makes it quite possibly the oldest surviving Asherah-related cult object ever discovered. It physically proves how deeply embedded goddess worship was in supporting early human community structures.
That is amazing.
It really is. These maternal fertility rites, centered around the Asherah pole, weren't just about making sure the crops grew next season. They were about the biological and spiritual continuity of the family. They represented the protective, hovering spiritual presence of the divine feminine over the household.
And what blew my mind in the text is that this wasn't just some forgotten pagan concept that vanished into the sands of time once the major monotheistic religions took over. The text notes how these exact ideas survived and echoed underground for thousands of years.
It's a testament to how badly human beings need this concept. I mean, you can actually draw a direct, unbroken line from these ancient maternal concepts of divine presence to much later esoteric and Kabbalistic traditions.
Oh, like the Shekinah.
Exactly. Consider the concept of the Shekinah in Jewish mystical tradition. The Shekinah represents the indwelling, comforting presence of God among humanity, the aspect of the divine that actually dwells here on earth with us.
Right.
And in rabbinic tradition, the Shekinah is overwhelmingly described using feminine imagery. It is a nurturing maternal presence.
And didn't some later mystical interpretations of early Christianity even pair the Holy Spirit with the concept of a second Eve?
Yes. deliberately drawing on these older, suppressed Jewish concepts to describe a feminine divine presence that comforts and creates. So the physical wooden poles may have been burned, but the psychological need for a divine presence that has a nurturing maternal quality, it never fully disappeared. It just went linguistic and mystical.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because if the Asherah pole was so universally loved and so deeply vital to a community's daily survival and structure, how did it become the enemy? Who benefits from cutting it down?
Well, to answer that, the text points us toward a massive clash of symbols. It contrasts how male and female divine authority was physically represented, and the difference is literally night and day.
It is perhaps the most profound gendered divide in all of sacred symbolism. Let's look at the mechanics of it. Think about the most common, universally recognized symbols of masculine divine or royal authority.
Right, the shepherd's crook, the royal scepter, the priestly staff.
Exactly. What do all of these objects have in common? They are tools that are held. They are wielded. You carry them in your hand to actively direct, to discipline, to dominate, and to control your environment.
The metaphor is clear. The king is the active shepherd of his people, using the firm staff to command the wandering flock.
But the Asherah pole operates on a completely alien logic to that. The pole wasn't wielded, it was planted.
Yes, deeply rooted in one specific spot in the earth.
Right, it didn't symbolize the power to walk around and dominate or control others. It represented the stationary power to nourish, to sustain, and to generate life from the ground up.
It represented the unbroken, localized chain of mothers and daughters, the deep roots of local ancestry that precede any king's temporary reign and will outlast any king's eventual death.
And that rootedness, that localized power, was incredibly popular among the common people. It was entirely embedded in everyday life.
Oh, absolutely. For example, archaeologists found inscriptions from an ancient desert site called Kuntelet Adrud that explicitly asked for blessings from, quote, Yahweh and his Asherah.
They worshipped her right alongside Yahweh.
They saw no contradiction at all.
Hmm.
But if you are an emerging centralized religious authority or a king trying to consolidate an empire, this decentralized, deeply rooted feminine power is a massive political threat.
Oh, for sure. You cannot monopolize the spiritual economy or collect centralized temple taxes if every village has their own sacred pole connecting them directly to the Divine Mother.
Which perfectly explains why we see this aggressive, highly systemic suppression in the historical texts. The reforming biblical kings, like Hezekiah and Josiah, are famously praised in the historical records for leading massive purges.
Right, going out and physically cutting down, smashing and burning the Asherah poles.
They weren't just tidying up theology, they were trying to violently centralize all religious worship and all political power into the temple in Jerusalem. They had to eliminate these older, local, feminine traditions to establish absolute control.
There's even a fascinating detail the text pulls from the book of Ezekiel, where the prophet is actively criticizing and condemning women in Jerusalem for baking ritual cakes for the Queen of Heaven.
Yeah, they were literally criminalizing the baking of bread for the goddess.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are witnessing in these historical moments is the deliberate breaking of an ancient foundational balance, right?
Absolutely. The text heavily emphasizes that ancient cultures originally believed that sustaining true human flourishing required both expressions of divine power to be active in the world.
You needed the masculine and the feminine.
You needed the king's authority, the shepherd's guidance, the structure of the law, but you equally, desperately needed the goddess's fertility, the earth's yield, and the mother's nurturing care.
You needed the staff that directs, but you also absolutely needed the pole that roots.
Yes. When the religious and political hierarchies decided to systematically cut down the poles, they essentially decided that human society only needed this staff.
And to prove exactly why cutting off those roots of feminine generative power is so devastating in practice, the text takes us away from the ancient Mediterranean entirely. We jump 1,000 years forward to 18th and 19th century America to examine a highly specific test case.
Right, a Christian sect called the Shakers.
Formerly known as the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing. The Shakers are a fascinating, almost perfect historical case study of what happens when a community's spiritual authority attempts to completely override and ignore biological reality.
The Shakers, interestingly enough, actually had their own beautifully stylized version of the Tree of Life symbol, which they painted and embroidered. But if you look closely at their specific design, it has one glaring, highly deliberate omission.
There are absolutely no roots.
None at all.
It's just a flat, straight, definitive horizontal line right at the base of the tree trunk. It's like they spent their entire lives building a gorgeous, towering skyscraper, but actively decided to saw off the concrete foundation while they were standing on the top floor.
That is a great analogy.
Or, I mean, to put it another way, it's like spending decades engineering the ultimate luxury two-seater sports car, but taking a solemn vow to never get a driver's license. And also outlawing roads, it makes no logical sense for survival.
That is a hilariously grim but accurate way to visualize it.
Right.
And that flat horizontal line at the base of their sacred tree wasn't just an arbitrary artistic choice, it was an active theological severance.
Right.
By removing the roots, they symbolically cut off the past, meaning no ancestors, no honoring of biological maternal lineage. And by doing so, they also cut off the future, meaning no children, no descendants.
And why is that? Because the theology of the Shakers explicitly chose the tree of knowledge over the tree of life.
I'm glad you brought that up because the text makes a huge vital distinction here. The concept of the tree of life is fundamentally about biological generative continuity. It's messy, it's earthly, it's about making babies and surviving.
But the tree of knowledge is entirely different. It's an abstract binary of moral obedience, intellectual purity, or spiritual authority.
Now, to be fair to the Shakers, they granted women incredible, unprecedented spiritual authority for the time. A woman named Anne Lee was actually revered by the community as the female manifestation of Christ on earth.
Wow.
Yeah, women could preach, they could lead communities, they had massive administrative power. But the cost of that power was an absolute non-negotiable vow of celibacy for every single member.
No sex, no marriage, no biological motherhood, period.
They essentially demanded that every single human being in their community exist only as the trunk of the tree, suspended entirely in the present moment with absolutely no biological connection to the generations before them or the generations that should have come after them.
And this brings us right back to that ancient foundational imagery of the wielded pole versus the rooted tree.
Yes, think of the famous rod of Asclepius. You know, the ancient Greek symbol of medicine featuring a serpent tightly wrapped around a wooden staff.
Right.
A carved pole or a staff is undeniably powerful. It can represent transformation, medical intervention, or liminal knowledge. But fundamentally, a pole is sterile.
It doesn't grow leaves. It doesn't generate new life.
Exactly. By demanding absolute, community-wide celibacy in exchange for spiritual purity, the Shakers voluntarily turned their entire society into a sterile pole.
The tragic irony of the Shakers' daily life is honestly heartbreaking when you think about it. If you know anything about the Shakers today, it's probably because they are world famous for crafting this exquisite, beautiful, minimalist wooden furniture.
Right, the iconic Shaker chairs, the massive dining tables, the impeccably joined cabinets.
They built these physical pieces to last for hundreds of years. Craftsmanship was literally their form of daily prayer. But because of their strict vow of celibacy, they mathematically, biologically guaranteed that they would have no actual descendants to ever inherit these beautiful things.
It's so sad.
They spent their days building for a future that they actively, deliberately ensured they would not be a part of. And the result of that rootless theology. At their peak in the 1800s, they had thousands of thriving members across multiple states. Today, there are fewer than 3 members remaining in the entire world.
The rootless tree failed entirely because it was fundamentally incompatible with the basic mechanics of how biological life actually works.
Exactly.
The historical lesson here is stark. You can offer women all the spiritual and administrative authority in the world, you can give them the staff of leadership, but if the prerequisite for that power is requiring them to surrender their generative power, their earthly fertility, their biological role as mothers and literal ancestors, you haven't actually liberated them.
You've just severed their roots from the earth.
Right? A human society simply cannot sustain itself by rejecting the very messy biological continuity that brings it into existence in the first place. You cannot survive on the trunk alone.
So what does this all mean? For you, listening right now, it's deeply worth reflecting on the structures, the companies, and the institutions in your own life today. Take a hard look at your workplace, your community, or your spiritual circles. Are they planted and nurturing like the ancient Asher pole, recognizing that long-term growth requires deep roots, patience, and actual human care?
Or are they operating like the rootless Shaker tree, demanding all of your present energy, demanding absolute intellectual obedience, but offering no real foundation, no nourishment, and absolutely no biological future.
That is the critical question we all have to answer. And as we leave you today, there is one final, somewhat haunting layer hidden in the mythology of this text that you should really mull over.
Yeah, it goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. The text recounts the myth of an early Greek king named Erythonius. According to the legend, Erythonius was born directly from the soil of the earth itself.
But his father was Hephaestus, right? The fearsome god of the forge, of blacksmiths, of fire, and of metallurgy.
That's right, and Erythonius was credited by the ancients with teaching the citizens of Athens how to smelt silver and process heavy metals.
Which, if you know anything about smelting, requires fire. A terrifying amount of fire.
An immense, insatiable amount of sustained heat. To fuel those massive, roaring Bronze Age furnaces, to melt the raw copper, to forge the heavy armor, the swords, and the metal wealth that literally built these early ancient patriarchal empires. Where exactly did they get the fuel?
They had to go out and cut down the forests.
They had to burn the very same ancient woodlands that had once served as their community's natural pharmacies and their secret protective groves. We often comfort ourselves by thinking we simply lost the sacred trees because abstract theology changed, or because people just stopped believing in the goddess.
But the historical reality is far more brutal and far more physical.
We didn't just forget the goddess. We literally burned the physical roots of the divine feminine in order to fire the furnaces that forged the weapons of patriarchal kings.
So the next time you look at a gleaming bronze sword behind glass in a museum, ask yourself, what ancient healing forest had to be cut down to light the fire that made it?